This past Memorial Day was just very much lackluster. It's usually one of the bigger movie weekends of the year. And this year, Mad Max Furiosa, which is the prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, was barely able to limp past Garfield for the #1 spot.
Sterling, you've said this on many occasions. If you're going to draw an audience, it's got to be made for teenage boys.
Yeah. Is this the end of the era of movie making as Americans have known it up till now?
What we've been getting a steady diet of the last decade, for the most part, I don't know how else to say this, a female acting the role of a masculine lead.
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Our topic today is the worst Memorial Day since 1995, at least for the box office.
Yes.
Were you alive then?
I was 1 year old.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I was alive.
I was exactly 1 year old, actually.
That's one of the best summers of my life.
Really?
Yeah. Rode my bikes everywhere. Went over to my friend's house every single day. Parents had no
5 years old?
Yeah.
Wow.
Parents had no idea where I was, except for I was in the neighborhood riding my bike somewhere.
Yeah.
The 90s were the last.
I got that in the early 2000s. Okay.
Okay. Well, maybe we all like to think of our
90s nostalgia.
our last best generation.
I know. I think you're right about the 90s. It's just that the 90s didn't end in 99. They actually went to like 2004.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well, when people talk about 90s kids, they mean people who were my age and in the 90s.
By the way, I just wanted to say something for our listeners real quick, because we haven't done this before. If you guys are liking the show, feel free to subscribe, of course.
Yes, please.
Go and send us a review or write us a review. Click the star buttons, whatever platform you're on. Just give us the things we need.
Yeah, interactions is always helpful. Even if you're commenting, that guy Sterling, he talks too much. That's okay. Just comment.
Yeah. If you like the stuff, give us a review, click the star, click the like button, subscribe, all that fun stuff. We'd really appreciate it.
Yes. Yes, please. Alrighty, but past the 90s, despite the worst Memorial Day box office since 1995. So this past Memorial Day was just very much lackluster. It's usually one of the bigger movie weekends of the year. And this year, Mad Max Furiosa, which is the prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, was barely able to limp past Garfield for the #1 spot.
How long has Garfield been out?
Both of them are very recent releases, late May, or mid to late May.
Yeah, that is telling.
Yeah. And the other thing is, apparently, it took Memorial Day weekend for the May box office total to exceed $500 million, which is not terrible, until you learn that from 2009 to 2019, the lowest May box office was $835 million. And 8 times it exceeded $1 billion.
And so what was this past?
This year it's just past 500 million. May's not quite over, so we don't know the full total yet.
What, just out of curiosity, over the last couple Memorial Day weekends, what have been the movies in the box office that would have maybe been the draw?
See, you always come up with these questions after I do my prep work.
Yes. I keep you on your toes,
You
Sterling.
Sure do.
Right.
Because Andrew, say something while I'm looking.
What I'm wondering, the reason I bring this up is it's not that Mad Max Furiosa wouldn't be maybe a draw. Obviously, it was a draw. But Garfield?
That was always going to be a
Well, here's
flop.
the thing. Sterling, you've said this on many occasions. If you're going to draw an audience, it's got to be made for teenage boys.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
That's the main ingredient for success.
And yeah, I mean, it's the...
Although last year the Memorial Day movie was The Little Mermaid, but that one was a flop eventually as well.
No pun intended. Oh,
Ha.
mermaid flop.
Yeah.
All right.
Good one.
Yeah.
Lame. Dad.
I'm just, I mean, it's the end of, the school year or near the end of the school year for a lot of kids. Is there I can understand where there might be this moment to draw, I'm done with school for the year. I want to do something. Go to the movies.
A summer celebration.
So that it would just naturally be higher because of that. Whereas maybe during the year, it's a less.
Yeah. I think since you asked me, the last year was Little Mermaid. That's not going to be a huge draw. And it wasn't. I think we're kind of in a decline for the movie industry. They're going to have to rejigger things, figure out how they really want to move forward in the world of podcasts and stuff. But 2 years ago, it was Top Gun Maverick. which was, of course, a huge success.
Yeah,
great movie.
Yeah, that one was.
So when you make the movie that appeals to teenage boys,
Yeah.
you know, big jets flying real fast, then they're going to go see it.
But that one was a genuine blockbuster
Yes, it was.
type of movie. I mean, that's what you kind of would expect from your entry into summer season. Those big movies that people have been anticipating. And I know we're talking about this the whole time. It's just, there is kind of like to what you're saying, Sterling, and what we're going to kind of talk about with this is, are we kind of at the end of an era?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that is my question. So is this the end of the era of movie making as Americans have known it up till now? There's been many eras, I guess, of movie making, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
So, you know, back in the day, you had the silent era, I guess. And then you had, I think it was the silver era, right?
Silver screen.
Silver screen. Yeah.
What is the golden age of movie making considered?
Is there one?
Yeah, I don't know. Golden age?
I mean, I would think anything from the 70s through to the 90s.
Okay, so they're calling the golden age all the way from 1910 to early 1960s. So that's a really big golden age.
Oh, that's interesting.
So pretty much the entire first half of
that's
the
like
20th century.
that's like when movies actually were invented.
Yeah.
Well,
basically.
yeah, pretty close.
Well, at least on a mass scale.
Yeah, on a mass
Right.
scale where the populace can go see them in the
But
theater.
I guess that makes sense. That's when Hollywood itself was really
Came in,
exploding,
yeah.
becoming the
Right.
powerhouse.
Okay.
And then after that, it was cemented. Everyone knew what Hollywood
I
was.
guess there's this kind of like the maturing of the development of the art form. Maybe it was fully matured by the time, you know, you come into the 70s. And the 70s was exploring different elements of movie making. The tech keeps developing, by the way.
It is interesting. I feel like you might have some insight onto this, but it does feel to me like the 70s were more of another transitional era where they were kind of figuring out where to go. And then the 80s it knows what it wants.
Yeah, well, I think that I'm hypothesizing on this, but I think that you're looking at the 1970s. America has come out of the 1960s, which was kind of the cultural revolution and upheaval that caused. They're in the midst of Vietnam War, which has caused a lot of Americans to even question like the goodness of America. Like, what are we existing for? We just seem to be going in. We're killing all these people in this foreign land for what? And I think that through the 1970s within film, there was kind of an exploration of a lot of these kind of questions, a questioning of the country, maybe you could say, and our culture. But I think by the end of it, this kind of era of questioning kind of and self-introspection maybe, and maybe even doom and gloomy.
Well, it kind of does tie into the politics of the era, right?
Yeah, I think it does. And then what happens is, and we're at this end of the 70s, we're in kind of a depression economically. And then, you know, Reagan's elected and the economy turns around and we're winning the Cold War and all this stuff. And the vibe is more, in one sense, it feels more like party. It's like, we're happy. We're focusing on positive. We're not second guessing ourselves or questioning ourselves. We are right. We know it and we are happy about it. That's very simplistic.
Well, I mean, I think
But
you're not
you
wrong
see it.
because look at like the first Rocky movie where Rocky loses, came out in 1976. And then Rocky 4, you know, the most patriotic movie of all time in the middle of the 80s.
Beats the Russian or the Soviet. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I think this is because I went through the early 90s is when I was in high school. And so there was the early 90s starts again, I would argue, some kind of almost an inward questioning again. It was like this we're asking questions about, well, what are we about now? And we've become wealthier. We've won the Cold War.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, all these things. And then there's
and that was also the early 90s was Disney's kind of new golden era where they were releasing some of their best ever animated works.
Yeah, their development then and what they're producing. Yeah, like you're saying.
Beauty
and
the
as
Beast
far as
and Little Mermaid, the first one.
And I would say through the 80s, end of the 70s, but really through the 80s, you could say is the household names for directors started to become like Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
I mean, just think of how big time he was. I mean, you got him doing Indiana Jones, you have the Jaws. He becomes almost like a household name when it comes to this stuff. And so
and what's the other aspect that we think really caused movies to be such a big part of American culture at that time?
Well, I think that it was a genuine understanding and connection with Americans and the culture.
I think absolutely.
Yeah. And I think there was more of a unification of the culture at the time.
In the 80s, for sure.
In the 80s, at least more so than now by quite a stretch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that might be the theme here is you see this cultural understanding and more of an idea of this is what it means to be an American. And then from the Hollywood standpoint, this is what our audience cares about and wants to see, and we're going to give that thing to them.
Right. Movies are the American art form. And in the 80s and in that era, generally, movies were being made by people who liked America.
Well, they were being made in general, you could say, by Americans for Americans.
Yes.
Yeah. By Americans for Americans.
And I think that while Hollywood was still more liberal than the country. I mean, I think it always has been.
Yeah.
But it wasn't so politically homogenous during that time.
Not homogenous, certainly. One movie that's coming out later this year in August that I'm looking forward to is the Reagan movie.
Yeah.
With Dennis Quaid. And apparently that details a lot of Reagan's fights starting in Hollywood against, as a leader of the labor union, Reagan was a leader of a labor union, against communists in Hollywood. So that was there, but there was pushback within Hollywood from Hollywood actors saying, no, America's good. And, Ronald Reagan, what better patriot can you ask to help lead inside Hollywood than Ronald Reagan?
Sure.
Yeah, and I do think, when we look at the era of let's say the 60s into the 70s, there was a lot of exploration of the art form, and because of the cultural revolution of the 60s, there was this kind of sense of there are no rules, so just explore. And that did happen in the art form. The way stories were told in the movies, the new kind of ways of looking at thinking things were kind of maybe not all embraced, but they were accepted as okay, you can ask these questions. Okay, you can go this way. Oh, let's see what you can create. I mean, Star Wars was groundbreaking in its day, and it would be, prior to that, any kind of sci-fi space movie would have been just kind of seen as almost a B movie.
Yeah. Or high auteur art kind of stuff like 2001. When did that come out? Let's see.
Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was
68. So that was kind of what space movies were before Star Wars.
Right. And that one is kind of even, that one is kind of even focusing on AI way ahead of its time, you could say. But I think that then with anything, any business is concerned about making money, right? And the bigger Hollywood got and the bigger these studios got, and they were big already, but I mean, I think there was kind of, for directors, always, it's kind of the age-old story where the artist is always, clashing with the financier, because the artist has these ideas and wants to do it, and the artist doesn't necessarily concern themselves with how much it's going to cost. They're just saying, I just have this idea.
Well, compared to when there were already big studios in the 40s, because back then I do know that actors would sign with the studio and be like, hey, we're making this movie, you're in it because you signed with us.
Right.
So they already had huge power. But in the 40s, it was kind of more of a time of tightening your belt and doing the war effort, and then
there would have
all
been
that stuff. And then compare that to the 80s, where it was a huge boom and America was doing fantastically economically.
Yeah. I mean, the economy had turned around. Yeah. And especially then the 90s. I mean, all these factors play into the history of the movies, but also in the 90s and then midway through the 90s, you have the development of the internet. Yep. And now, it didn't immediately impact the movie industry right away in the way it has today.
Right. And that's I think, I do agree that American movies for Americans is probably the big reason why we love the movies of the 80s so much. But that is, I think, one of the big things that's causing this worst Memorial Day since 95 that we've just had, which is there's just so many other options now.
Yeah.
If you want an hour or two of entertainment in, 1985, you go see Rocky IV, because that's about your only option. If you want an hour or two of entertainment in 2024, you just scroll through YouTube and see who among your people you follow has released a video that day.
Yeah. It's free.
Yeah. Well, it is free. I mean, in that it doesn't cost you anything in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go anywhere.
And culturally, I guess you can still do dinner and a movie as a date night is still a thing, obviously. But I don't know. Kids these days, is that what they do?
I think more and more it seems that the trend is meet me online. Like meet me in the game lobby and we're going to go and game online.
I don't know about for dates. For buddies, certainly that's a big thing.
I guess I wasn't. Yeah, Thomas used the date thing. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I was going a different direction mentally than that. I was thinking a little bit more broadly.
Okay, so like with your bros, you get I mean,
if me and three of my guy friends want to do something, we're gonna go play Helldivers 2 or something, and we're all gonna play together.
You're gonna play games online. You know, online gaming obviously is huge.
Yeah, I think for dates is probably still a thing, but I wouldn't say that in the heyday of movies that was like the primary reason why people went to the movies.
Well, let me ask it this way: when's the last time you took your wife to a movie for a date?
It's probably been like 2 years ago.
You're failing there, Andrew.
Dang it! And you know what? It was actually she took me for my birthday, and you know what we went to see?
What?
Maverick.
Yeah, I mean that was. It seems like that was, and maybe it still is cliche. The date, the general date is dinner and a movie. I mean, that is kind of the generic.
That's
date. Kind of been decades that's kind of been the practice in the American culture, and I think it still is. But
well, and I think something that we haven't really added to this yet is that I think all of us like movies.
Oh yeah,
and enjoy the theater experience.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
and like that's not something we want to go away.
No,
but it's going to have to change. There's just no two ways around it.
So when we say that's going to have to change, how might be my next question.
Yeah. How is a good question. I think one is, they're going to have to stop relying on already existing properties so heavily.
Yeah, that really plays on this era of nostalgia that we've been witnessing. I know we've done a couple of shows at least one on the concept of nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
And to that point, I think Mad Max is a really interesting example because these are examples of legacy, nostalgic properties that people are trying to basically just continue to cash in on.
And despite that, Furiosa has almost no connection to the old Mad Max movies. It only connects to Mad Max Fury Road from a decade ago.
Yeah.
But even that is enough.
Yeah.
That's still nostalgic.
Yeah. That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. This is a sequel movie or
it's like fourth or fifth in the franchise.
Has been a formula that has been super common in the last 5 years, at least, maybe more. And also it's been successul.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know when that formula of the sequel, maybe in the 70s, but really in the 80s and 90s, you kind of
that's when you started seeing big trilogies and stuff.
These sequels. It's almost like Hollywood started to realize maybe this is the business angle of it. If you have the same cast of characters that people have fallen in love with, you can do another story around them in the universe in which you put them in, and people.
It's a much safer bet that they show up.
Yeah, people already have a connection, so they're going to want to see the next chapter in these people's lives, kind of thing.
And another aspect is that, despite the fact that I just said they're going to have to stop relying so heavily, the original movies do struggle. There's been 2 original movies that I do want to see. I just haven't made it to see them yet this year. Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare with Henry Cavill and Alan Ritchson, and that looks fantastic to me. It's about a group of something like rogue agents in World War II, and I'm interested in that, but I haven't made it to the theater to see that. And the other one is Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
Both of those are supposed to be kind of general audience appealing action movies, and I haven't gone to see either one of them. And part of that is I feel like I don't see or hear about these movies until I'm watching clips of them online, and at that point I'm like, well, I'll just wait.
Well, and that might be another issue or another component to this is, you see the trailers online, or then you've got your favorite podcasters commenting on the stuff before you've gone to see it.
Right.
And that's prolific. And,
are we killing the movie industry?
Maybe we are, Sterling.
We're so powerful.
I mean, it would be any advertising, generally speaking, is what is going to get at least the name out there.
Yeah.
But I could see if you've developed, that's an interesting point. If you've developed a kind of trust in YouTube movie reviewers, like the Critical Drinker. Let's use him as an example.
Yeah.
And he reviews a film and basically excoriates it for being, garbage.
Yeah.
You're probably going to be less excited to go see it and spend your money on it, especially, and this is the thing we haven't brought in yet, but we'll bring it in now, the cost.
Yeah.
Movies, now their cost hasn't risen as high as other sectors of the economy things have cost.
I'd say food's probably gone up more,
at
least under Biden.
But the ticket prices have increased.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember a time when the expectation for like not a matinee would have been maybe $10, probably maybe even like $8.50 or something for a 8:30 showing of a big movie, and now it's going to be like $20.
Yeah, I remember when
and then add in your popcorn and drinking all that stuff. I mean, you're not getting out there for like less than $50.
Yeah,
yeah, I remember,
especially if you've got a family like you do.
Correct. Yeah.
It used to be when I was in high school, you could go to a movie for $4.50, like a new release.
My grandfather always told me I think my grandmother told me she used to be able to take a couple eggs to the theater and that would get them in.
Wow. That's funny.
Yeah. I mean,
well, that's got to be another component here and that's affecting a lot of other areas of the U.S. economy and culture. And that's just the price of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is crazy high.
That is going to be.
So yeah, I think that is a good point. As generally the economy slows down, the box office is going to slow down. That's just 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah. But to the point of the internet, and then of course, the next thing that follows that is the streaming services. So the way in which we consume now, of course, cable TV has been around since the 80s, but you have now with the streaming, it empowers anyone to watch almost anything on their own schedule.
Yeah.
And the way that the streaming services work now, the way TV shows, I hesitate to call them TV shows anymore because they're not actually TV. It's these streaming.
Yeah, it's I don't know what to call it. It's like a
Streaming
long,
shows.
drawn out movie.
Yeah,
in parts,
a mini series,
right?
Practically.
Yeah. And so the quality of that is as good as anything you'll see in the movies,
for sure.
And so, that because people want it this way, they're able to slow down and tell the story more fully, you could say, or develop the characters more fully in a way that you can't do in 2 hours or 2.5 hours. Now, a good movie can still do it. Like I think Dune and Dune 2 proved it.
Yeah.
You can do that. Now, they were 3-hour movies, but still, you could still do it. You just have to have a really good team, script writing, and storytelling visually. That's the thing Dune does, and with music. But Dune does a great job on all three of those fronts.
Another thing about Dune that I'll say, this isn't really something you can know before you go see the movie. It's the kind of thing you find out after when you're watching the extra material they include on the DVD. But if the cast and crew are not excited about the movie as they're watching it, I feel like it's not going to be a good movie. And that's something I've watched the extra material for Dune 2, and they were so excited to be working on it. And they were making, a like 4-story tall slab of sandworm for people to be riding on so that it would look real and they would actually be tilting it and stuff. And
almost the actors are not even acting, they're almost experiencing something. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. There's a reason it was done so well. And you had a director and you had a studio that was willing to spend the money on it and actors that bought in. I think that the other factor here, and maybe it's the least factor, but it feels like the most for me, and maybe for all of us, it's just not great storytelling.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
With so much of what's coming out, not necessarily in theaters, but on streaming platforms as well, it's just the storytelling is so lackluster.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
Well, I think Thomas has an explanation that I think is correct.
I mean, I think that, well, it depends on the genre. Let's put it this way. I'm going to say that your action adventure movie, which really came into its own in one sense in the 80s. And
I think that's accurate.
Had developed your stereotypical male lead who was the hero, whether it was Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, or even Bruce Willis. You had these strong male characters, and guys loved them.
Yeah. And there's nothing sexist about it. It's just that guys enjoyed this.
Yeah.
And so they showed up.
Yeah. And it was the type of film that, and there were several of these, and they're still favorites of people to this day. And it's not to say that they didn't have other movies that kind of had female leads even through the 80s. But what we've been getting a steady diet of the last decade, for the most part, I don't know how else to say this, a female acting the role of a masculine lead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't inspire guys in this. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. And, maybe that lends a little bit of credence to what the left always says about representation is important, where, they're like, we have to have the female action star because the girls have to know they can be that. But the other side of the coin is that you're not giving us the male action stars and the guys aren't coming to see them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then being upset that the guys don't like or aren't inspired by the female
right.
action
And
star.
it has nothing to do with any conscious decision on the part of the men. It's just purely, I'm not really that interested, so I'll just spend my time and money somewhere else.
Yeah. Like, let's just give a basic example of the fanboydom. I guess I can use that word.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones. A lot of dudes, a lot of young guys like myself grew up in just really like the idea of Indiana Jones and what he did was so cool. And, we imagined doing it ourselves and stuff like that. And what also was what generated, I guess you could say, merchandise revenue, but it wasn't even directly merchandised by the movie company. But let's say his fedora hat, his whip, his leather jacket, just the look of him. You go on forums and there's all kinds of fans that like buy these things and try to look like him.
I'm several of them.
Yeah.
I have the whip, I have the satchel, I have the hat, and I have the coat.
Exactly.
They're not exactly right, but they're close enough.
So you don't do that as a guy with a female superhero.
Yeah,
lead.
obviously I'm not going to buy Furiosa's outfit.
Well, it depends on the kind of guy you are.
Yeah.
I guess if you're a queen.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that is an example of just human nature. We want to imitate what we admire.
Yeah.
And you got a bunch of guys who who is their action star, action figure, or their male role model in the movies, you could say, that they're looking to and saying that hasn't been. And another thing, those that had existed from the 80s and the 90s and stuff have been systematically like destroyed in some ways by the newer movies coming back in, connected to them and trying to focus on their warts rather than their I don't know, the good things about them.
Right. I won't mention the elephant in the room, but staying on indie, with the big Indiana Jones release last year that people didn't go to see.
Yeah.
That a big Indiana Jones fan, didn't go to see. And I like Indiana Jones. He's great. But there is just something about, when it's the really cool action star who's now old and a little bit frail.
Yeah.
A lot of the appeal has been lost. It's not that we don't still like Harrison Ford.
Right.
It's just that he can't be that action star.
Yeah.
And that's what the appeal was.
It almost would have been better if he had a role as the experienced sage,
right? The mentor
on to the next, whoever that may be.
Which they tried with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and Shia LaBeouf did not go over terribly well.
Yeah, that was a miscalculation.
Yeah. I think that part of Hollywood's, being kind of gone woke, part of that narrative is the danger of, and there's some something legitimate about this with the whole Me Too movement. There was a bunch of toxic masculinity within Hollywood, but they broad brushed it.
And now they're afraid to admire men in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pendulum swing.
Yeah.
And you see this a lot of times where a overcorrection occurs, where it's just a departure from balance or a resistance to balance. And when you're met with a a problem, it's like, all right, let's go the other direction completely.
Yeah. And that is, I've mentioned it before, I think, but it's one of my favorite quotes, and it comes from Martin Luther, and it's, humanity is like a drunk man returning home on a donkey who, having fallen off on the left side, will get back up and proceed to fall off on the right side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. The whole kind of pendulum analogy.
Encapsulates it perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to maintain that balance, in other words.
Yeah.
And so I think we're hitting on several different elements. Are there any other elements that you can think that may be causing this? And where do you think the future may lie for the box office? Yeah,
where the future lies is a big question I'll set aside for a moment. But where else do I think this lackluster performance is coming from? We've mentioned it a little bit. We've kind of touched around this, but I'll just read this quote that just came out from Kathleen Kennedy, who's one of the most powerful people on the planet Earth and is the head of Lucasfilm. So she's in charge of Indy and Star Wars. And there's this new show coming out that's already getting flack because it's set in the Star Wars universe. And for myself, I say, just leave it alone. That's where my flack's coming from. But they're, of course, identifying a different source for the flack. So she said, operating within these giant franchises now with social media and the level of expectation, Kennedy said, I think Leslie, the director of this new show, has struggled a little bit with it. I think a lot of the women who step into Star Wars struggle with this a bit more because of the fan base being so male-dominated. They sometimes get attacked in ways that can be quite personal. And then she goes on to say, anyone who engages in bigotry, racism, or hate speech, I don't consider a fan, which that's a red herring. So leaving that aside, but talking about you keep bringing in these female directors or writers or whatever to make Star Wars stories when you know the fan base is male dominated. Are you not setting yourself up for failure? Why are you blaming us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whatever happened to the old adage, the customer is always right.
And yeah, no kidding.
If you have a huge male fan base and you're making stuff that doesn't appeal to the male interest and it doesn't perform well, why are you surprised?
Yeah.
So part of it is that there is this idea that we need to change what people are interested in. We need to tell people this is what you should be interested in.
And it's about as ham-fisted as you can do it.
Right. And it could be the greatest thing in the world. It could be you need to be interested in, going out every day and
exercising.
Exercising. That's a good example. But because you're doing it ham-fisted and it's not where the interest naturally lies, it doesn't go over well. People don't like being preached at when they're going for entertainment.
Yeah, and it's also a way of deflecting from legitimate criticism by playing the victim and calling all your critics
racists, homophobes.
The critics, by raising often legit criticism, you're avoiding what the criticism is and just saying, well, these guys have bad motives.
Right.
So I don't have to listen.
And listening to a lot of the media today about what qualifies you as bigoted, racist, or engaging in hate speech, it seems like that's a good 100 million people in America or more.
Well, they're empty words.
They are empty words, but I'm just saying if that's the people you're writing off, then you're writing off, a good chunk of the people who were going to be giving you money. And you're saying, I'm just writing them off. And then you complain that you don't get the money.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's a defense mechanism. It's a blame shift for a product that's failing to make the revenue necessary or wanted by the company. And so if you can keep blaming, you're trying to two things. You're trying to deflect blame from yourself and you're trying to guilt people into supporting it.
Yeah. I'll correct myself real quick. The quote about bigotry and racism comes from Headland, who I believe is the director of this new show, Acolyte, not from Kennedy herself, but anyhow.
Yeah. I mean, they're going and doing the song and dance for their brand and it must work with some people, guilting them into saying, oh, either not raising criticism or going the full 9 yards and actually
isn't that like a key tenet of DEI is guilt trip?
Well, not openly, but yes.
I think it is. I mean, yeah, not openly, but it's rather obvious.
Yeah, but the fact is it may work. Like there's certain arguments and things that work in that you win the argument, but you lose the audience.
Yeah.
And so they're winning the argument, I suppose, and it sounds great in their own social circles and in their bubbles, but they're not making money. And so eventually, hopefully, I pray they'll realize, oh, we're still not making money no matter how much we win the argument. I guess we have to have a different argument.
Yeah. I mean, it took the communists in Russia a while before they finally gave up and realized, okay, this system doesn't work.
And it wasn't wholly from within. It took outside pressure as well.
You're right. But yeah, I think when you're running a business and you're trying to make money in the business and people aren't buying the product, blaming people for being bigots as to why they're not buying the product isn't going to sell the product. That's the part that they're really failing out here. And it's an excuse that maybe they can, I guess, use it to not actually have people critically look at what they're producing and ask the hard questions like, well, why would you do a story like this? Or this was not well thought out, or this could have been better. They're avoiding all these. There's critics still. There's always been critics, but I remember that Siskel and Ebert, you'd watch them give their thumb up or thumb down, and they'd review all these movies. And for the most part, those dudes didn't hold back.
Yeah.
They would be like, this is just bad. I would give it, I could find nothing good about it. I mean, I remember them doing reviews like that.
And now seemingly every review is 8 stars minimum out of 10.
Yeah.
So on the point about just there's kind of this dearth of actual good quality and what's driving that. There's a quote that George R.R. Martin just gave in an interview. He's the author of the Song of Ice and Fire series, Game of Thrones. And he said, I'll start a little bit earlier. Everywhere you look, there are more screenwriters and producers eager to take great stories and make them their own. It does not seem to matter whether the source material was written by Stan Lee, Charles Dickens, Ian Fleming, Roald Dahl, etc., etc., etc. There's several other options. No matter how major a writer is, no matter how great the book, there always seems to be someone on hand who thinks he or she can do better, eager to take the story and improve on it. The book is the book, and the film is the film, they will tell you, as if they're saying something profound. Then they make the story their own. They never make it better, though. 999 times out of 1,000, they make it worse. Mm-hmm. I think he said it really well. There's a reason he's a best-selling author. He knows how to put words together.
Sure. Yeah. It's like a great example is the Romeo and Juliet film that's coming out soon.
Yeah, that's the other thing where they wanted to make it their own. And yeah. So expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, they're making Juliet black, and it's just contextually erroneous. It's
baffling.
It's totally out of context. I mean, for the time period in Italy, that would have literally never existed.
Right. It's I don't actually know exactly when, but it's sometime medieval in Verona, Italy, which is northern Italy.
Yeah.
And it's Juliet, who is like I had someone online, I saw a post and it said, you're making fun of this black Juliet actress now, but if she conformed to Eurocentric beauty standards, you'd be singing her praises. Yes, I would.
Yeah.
She's Juliet.
Yeah. But then on the other side of the coin, I mean, I've heard rumor of a black 007.
Yeah.
And that sounds great. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm not crazy about it, but that's fine. There's certainly lots of black actors who could kill that role.
Yeah. Well, it's a Secret Service kind of thing. That could be technically, it could be anybody.
Yeah.
Who's in that role.
Especially from modern Britain.
Yeah. So that's contextually, congruent. It actually works. But this doesn't work at all because it just never would have happened.
Right.
And what's the point? Like, why is it good for the story?
Right. That's the other thing. And it's because they want to make it their own. And what their own image is, I want this black actress or I want a black actress because then I get to explore the reception basically to what if I have Romeo and Juliet with a black Juliet. And it's not it's actually about the pushback they're going to get. I genuinely believe that. I think that's why they do this. It's because this is going to get this response, and then it allows me to say these things in interviews and up my own profile.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
And it probably is. I'm asking, why are they doing another one of these movies? Romeo and Juliet has been done how many times?
Well, I don't I don't find that a compelling question just because it's Romeo and Juliet.
Well, I do, because I feel like it's maybe every generation needs another Romeo and Juliet movie or its latest take on it. And maybe for this one, maybe it's contextualized in modern Italy.
Maybe.
And so then
I bet there's still not even that many black people in Verona, Italy today, though.
Maybe. No. But there's probably more than there was back in 1400s or whenever. But
I will say, I think the last Romeo and Juliet movie was probably Nomeo and Juliet, so it's time to get some humans again.
Yeah.
I never saw it. Did you see that one?
I know. I've seen the Sherlock Holmes Gnome movie, but I haven't seen the Romeo and Juliet one.
I think the last one I saw was Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes.
Yeah.
That was an interesting take, and it was kind of a modern take on it.
That was 90s, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but people do still say the 60s one is the best one. So there is some question about why do we need that? But at the same time, I'm like, well, there's certain classic stories that humanity is going to keep retelling. And that's why the stories have survived to today. And it's going to keep happening until people forget about the story.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, it's when you do a Shakespeare, because it was, originally is a play.
Yeah.
And so when you're going to do movies about a movie giving its take off of a Shakespearean play, I mean, that's pretty normal. I don't fault it as being like, if you had, now it would be another thing if it was like an iconic film and somebody comes along and says, well, I'm going to do another one, redo this film, but with different actors and everything like that, and I'm going to make it better, or we have to do our own representation of this film. To me, that doesn't make sense.
You're saying with the film, it doesn't make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think with Romeo and Juliet, written 500 years ago, it makes sense, or 400 years ago.
Yeah, the original source material is what is the historic thing. If somebody came along and say, I'm going to rewrite Romeo and Juliet, which probably...
that happens all the time,
probably do that too. But no one's going to consider the rewrite better than Shakespeare's original.
Right, yeah. Well, just one other thing that we didn't really get to that I think is contributing to the lackluster box office performance is we mentioned briefly podcasts, but I do think that's a big thing where it's just you have this other visual form of entertainment readily on hand. But I think the other thing is it's video games.
Yeah, a competing medium.
Well, there's video games that are nothing like movies, and there's video games that are essentially, interactive movies. And I think the interactive movie genre, which is not one I love, but many people do, I think that one is probably drawing a lot of people who would otherwise be spending time and money on movies.
This has another angle to it. I don't know if it's true or not. Just a thought. The story writing, script writing for video games has gotten better than what it used to be.
Sometimes it's stellar.
Yeah, than what it was back in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid.
Yeah, back then it was still mostly computer nerds, just like, I need a story,
Yeah, and the story...
What does Donkey Kong say when Mario arrives?
Yeah, the story is pretty basic. I mean, you had Final Fantasy, which had more of a story. Like, the Japanese were developing a little bit more broad stories within the game you're playing. But I even remember, like, sometimes getting annoyed that the story was going too long and just wanted to get to the gameplay.
That's how I feel about video games today.
But I'm just wondering... has the storytelling gotten so good has it even like stole some writers away from like maybe Hollywood who would be writing scripts for movies and now they're writing scripts for video games?
I feel like that must be the case. I can't speak for certain, but I do know the video game industry brings in more money than the box office industry.
Yeah.
And I can speak to, there's a game came out in 2019 called Hades that I think has some of the best writing, sound design, video game design, music design, all of that. It's just a 10 out of 10 game in my opinion. And it just had a sequel just come out. And that one, again, the storytelling is fantastic. And it's throughout, as you play the game, you're interacting with characters talking and getting little bits of story. And it's extremely well done. So yeah, there is this big move to incredible storytelling within the video games.
So it's almost like a blending of genres.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, so overall, do video games make more money than all of like Hollywood and TV and everything? Or is it just...
I'm quoting something I read a long time ago. I haven't checked this recently, but I believe so, yes.
Wow.
Let's see. Video game industry on Statista. Market revenue 2019 to 2029. That's interesting. Oh, apparently in 2029, video games are going to make $666 billion. So that's when the world ends, clearly. But last year they made $406 billion. And let's look at the total.
That's when everybody is plugged into the Neuralink.
Well, $666 billion, not, 667. So
yeah, it's Neuralink.
Yeah. Okay. This is just the highest grossing movies. So that's not really helpful.
No. Where's TV?
Total
TV, video, and film. What is that?
Oh, here we go. 2021. Need an account. All right. Okay. Here we go. Total box office gross for last year was $8.9 billion. So that's not counting all DVDs and stuff like that. But the difference was several $100 billion. So I don't think they're anywhere close.
Interesting.
Because it was $400 billion last year for video games, and it's almost $9 billion for movies last year. Yeah, almost $9 billion.
Of course, is that theaters?
Oh, is that just domestic though?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's so.
Because video game is worldwide,
but
right?
still, it's not the domestic market is about half of the market. So, max is going to be like 50 billion.
Okay.
Which is still much less than 400. Yeah, and this doesn't have a comprehensive number.
Yeah, I was just curious. That just seems pretty amazing because it wouldn't have been that way 20 years ago.
No.
Yeah. Times they are changing.
They sure are. And there's a new AAA video game.
So,
yeah.
Do we want to just throw out our prediction for the future of the industry or our thoughts or just what do you think?
It's hard to say where it's going to go. None of us are seers.
Yeah. I mean, based on the trends, it's not going in the right direction. Now, is it primarily economically, is the economy the primary reason? Are people just kind of struggling and so they're cutting out some of their luxury expenses?
There's that. There was the writer's strike last year, so that affects the
writing
movies onward ahead of that. There's, like we said, the competition. I think the movie industry is heading for a shakeup. As it is, Disney and some of these other big studios have so much power and so much influence on the movie world. That's not going to last forever, hopefully, if the art form is going to survive. And so at some point, something will break that. And then we will probably see an explosion of lots of lower quality, lower budget, but creative endeavors. And then some of those will rise to the fore, just like I think we kind of speculated happened in the 70s.
I think that's a fair assessment.
But what I mean, I guess, is the Dayton movie box office experience. Like going to the theater to watch the latest movie. That kind of, that's what I'm.
Sometimes I think about that and juxtapose it against newspapers and think about this cultural, ubiquitous thing that this is what you do, this is what it means, and there's an emotional connection, but over time it ebbs.
Yeah.
I happen to think that the movie theater probably has a stronger hold on the spirit of America than newspapers ever did.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, the movie theater is selling an experience. Newspaper was just selling the actual paper for the day.
Right. But I wonder if they could be compared because in a lot of ways, we talked about several instances of technology shift being a culprit here.
Yeah.
So I think for the reasons, cultural reasons, it will hold on. So the dinner night thing, I think that is still a cultural experience. That's a story that everybody understands. Yeah,
I agree. I will say I don't think you can foresee a time reasonably where you won't be able to go in any reasonably large town to a theater and dinner for a date.
Yeah. But, as things change and there are other experiences, maybe it just becomes more of a nostalgic thing.
Yeah. Or are we maybe already there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're mostly already there. The industry doesn't quite know it yet, I think. So I think we'll probably see many theaters shut down, not nearly all of them. It might be kind of like going to the theater becomes something more like going bowling, which is pretty close to where we are now. But like I said, the industry hasn't quite caught up to that reality, I don't think.
Yeah. When was the last time you went to a movie that was, I guess it still happens on like opening weekends and stuff for a big film where it'll be packed. But
yeah, I mean, it happened for Dune 2. Yeah. I saw it a week early.
I just don't see where a popular movie after the first weekend, maybe 2 weekends, and then it's it seems like the most of the time I've gone to movies, and generally it's not the first weekend, I can go up, pull up, grab a ticket, walk in, and the majority of the seats are going to be empty.
Well, I think that's been true for a very long time after the first 2 weekends.
Maybe you're right. It seemed to be, and maybe I've just, as time has passed, I had in more of my adult life, I was going to the movies less frequently than I was when I was, in college and teenager. But I remember in college, man, we would go, there was a $1.50 theater in the area.
Well, that's different.
Well, it is and it isn't, because there's still
Well, what I mean is I've gone to there was a dollar theater in town, and I've gone to that when the movie was almost a year old and the theater was quite full. That's very different from the third or fourth week in a regular theater of the same movie that's, just been out for 3 or 4 weeks. Once it gets to the dollar theater, you have a whole new audience of people who don't want to spend as much money.
Okay. Well, that's maybe that's the thing. Would you see that if theaters started dropping their costs, their prices, to get more of a crowd to come?
Yeah.
Would that turn it around? And I'm just,
I think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if, obviously they price things at a certain point because they want to make money off of it and they need to make money off of it, etc. But
well, they haven't been making money from their ticket sales for a long time already. So that's one thing. They can't drop it really without just losing money, because they're already not making their money on ticket sales. They make it on concessions. So, maybe they can make the tickets cost $5 again, but popcorn costs $25, which is actually where it already is.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the economics of it is the more people you have come through, the less you have to charge for any of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's all about, it's kind of like the problem with taxes. You generate more revenue for the government, actually, ironically, when you lower taxes.
Yeah.
Because the economy boosts, and so that actually creates more money going into government coffers. It seems counterintuitive, but that's actually what occurs. And I'm wondering if they really got desperate, you drop the prices, and when people see, hey, you can come see the latest movie for $7 rather than $15, people are saying, well, maybe we should just do that. That would be a good way to spend it. And if the movie wasn't great or didn't even need to be hyped as much, you'd still have a bigger audience. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm not. They obviously they've got their own finance guys and everything running the numbers on this stuff. But to me, I guess they're happy with what it is right now.
Yeah.
I mean, happy enough not to do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we've talked this pretty well through. So we talked about the Memorial Day results being pretty lackluster, especially compared to the past few years. Of course, 2020 and 2021 were exceptions, but compared to 2009 to 2019, this weekend was just terrible, and adjusted for inflation, it's the worst since 1995. We've talked about kind of how they're blaming the audiences and saying it's because you're sexist or whatever, and how they just aren't appealing to the audiences that used to show up for these movies. Mm-hmm. And if you don't market it to those people don't show up. Big shock. And I guess we've talked about where we think it's going. And I think the good news for the consumer is you have options. You have so many options. And it's all, I think lots of it is very high quality. So what do you think? You tell us, leave us some comments.
We'd love to hear you.
Yep. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast, brought to you by the Patriot Post. The Patriot Post is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.